Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session. My name is Danny, and I'm the event planner for the New York Reactor Space. Before we start, I have a few things to go over. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Useful links will be shared in the chat. The session is recorded and will be available on demand 24 to 48 hours on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. Which brings us to today's session. It'll run for approximately 1 hour with time for questions throughout. I will now turn it over to our speaker for introductions.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be speaking with you. The topic of our presentation is Real-World Cyber Attacks Illustrated, Rapid Recovery and Response Techniques. This is a level 200 session and will run approximately about 15 minutes. It's going to cover a real customer case study and a cloud journey where a customer put in security as an afterthought, unfortunately, into the cloud migration strategy and started testing waters and got compromised as a part of the process. So what we'll do is we'll have an illustrated attack chain walkthrough of what the cyber attack scenario was and how the incident unfolded, and then how you can use Microsoft Cloud Solutions and security solutions in conjunction with NIST to be able to quickly recover, respond, and identify, protect, detect, and respond and recover. So with that said, the scenario that this particular end user was into was they had a mandate from a C-level that was above the CIO to do a cloud migration of all of their systems because the hardware refresh was coming in within the next 3 to 4 months. And it wasn't approved for them to be able to purchase hardware anymore. They got into a situation where hardware was no longer something that the C-levels wanted to go down. It was a government type public institution. They wanted to go more towards cloud. They had some antiquated solutions and technology, and security was something that became an afterthought, unfortunately, instead of the primary focus prior to the migration. So if you look, there's several migration triggers that that are possible, even outside of this scenario. But it's usually data center contracts expiry or integrations or capacity and those types of needs or scalability needs, or like I said, software hardware refresh, so on and so forth. And then also modernization needs, right? Where you're kind of going into that realm. Or very recently, when you look at like the purchase of VMware through a provider, now the cost of that same on-prem solution is basically skyrocketing from what used to be a couple $100,000 to a couple $1 million, right? So when you start to look at and evaluate those types of solutions and renewals come up, this particular end user was under a lot of pressure and started their cloud journey in a way that basically got them, unfortunately, compromised. So the goal of this is going to be for us to kind of walk through the journey, and we'll walk through exactly what happened with them. So here's the illustration of the real world cyber attack that occurred, where we had a developer and an infrastructure person that was also under pressure to get a test solution added and start to kind of move their workloads in and just start to test that process. What they did was they put an external IP on that system in trying to pretty much get it set up and make it accessible, so on and so forth. The attacker gained control of that system and downloaded malware and, just from a known malware site. Additionally, what happened is they were using images that they had from an on-premise server infrastructure environment, which basically was their local admin user ID and password. That's something that a lot of times when you're setting up an environment, you're just sucking in an image or doing something that's already there, that's pre-existing, or building based on an existing practice. They were able to gain control via local admin privileges and gain access to that system, which was pretty much, unfortunately, the same local admin user ID and password across the board for all of the server infrastructure systems. So command and control was quickly established. The attacker then basically went into reconnaissance mode and sat in the environment for probably, I want to say, a couple of weeks, where they sniffed out a highly privileged ERP service account to gain access to the environment. Unfortunately, in this scenario, the service account did not have MFA, so there was no multi-factor authentication or blocker. It was a service account, and any time that the business was requested to change the service account password and things like that, that password just was not the proper character length, because every time they wanted to change the password, services would break, things like that would happen. I know a lot of you that are probably attending this session are probably nodding their head and saying, yes, that's me. That's my scenario. This is something that you can use to go and tell your chiefs or your executives that these are the type of scenarios that get us in, a deeper mess, or in a pretty hard situation where, best security practices are not followed and it ends up becoming an afterthought. So essentially what happened when the attack chain is, when the attacker used a highly privileged ERP service account, they also had specific domain controller access that they were that they were able to gain control on. The attacker then elevated themselves to that domain admins group, removed all the other domain admins, kept themselves in, created a couple of backdoor accounts. The attacker then used group policy to spread the infection to all the systems. I know it's probably the worst use of group policy, but the attacker was able to pretty much use group policy to spread the infection. Thank goodness that group policy is not that effective, and it only works 80% of the time. So the attacker was not able to pretty much get all the systems, but they got about 80% of the systems. But eventually we're able to capture almost 90 to 95% of the systems. If that wasn't bad enough, the attacker then went on to encrypt the backups and then delete the backups of the entire environment. So once they have command and control, once they have those capabilities in place, they're really able to kind of move laterally across the attack chain or across the environment, where they're able to pretty much gain access across the environment and then start to go through the process of, encrypting and then also requesting ransom. In this particular scenario, the challenge was when the attacker was going through the environment, they didn't have any way to really see what was going on across the environment. So the challenges that they had was they had several disconnected security tools and sources. Another huge challenge, getting back to the attack chain, was when the ERP service account was being flagged as a system that had anomalous behavior. They put that inside of their tool set as a medium risk, because that ERP service account was continuously used across the board for several different functions and for cross systems and things like that in communication. So there's several bits and points of human error, but along with people, process, and tools. But this was just one of the key scenarios that they had, where they had disconnected sources. They're trying to figure out what the issue is. Everyone is scared to touch the ERP service account, and they didn't really have a holistic solution or a process. So one of the key things as a part of that scenario was they had a unfortunate cloud journey, but where they started off and just kind of started off in a hectic mode or situation, and they didn't have any tools really to help them kind of traverse and look through the environment as they were being attacked. One very important aspect of this is, if you have the capability to have a SIM and a SOAR, or a SIM in place, at least to be able to identify, protect, detect, and respond, it makes life a whole lot easier to see where things are in the attack chain and how you're actually able to quickly see where an attack is unfolding. A good example of this is if you're leveraging Microsoft Sentinel. It's got both SIM and SOAR baked into it, and it gives you all the disconnected data sources that you have in your environment, and it connects them all up holistically into one aggregate, right? So you have Log Analytics Workspace, you have your Microsoft Sentinel setup, and then essentially you're able to identify, protect, and detect very quickly across the environment. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, you can pretty much see that if you see an incident pop up or if you need an investigation, you can visualize the full scope of the attack and be able to respond pretty quickly. You have threat hunting, You have all these other capabilities. You have run books that you can have, so on and so forth. It's just one of those things that becomes, unfortunately, an afterthought when you're looking to do it, and you're like, yep, I'll secure the environment, or hey, the cloud's already secure. Why do I have to go ahead and secure it? The response to that is yes, the cloud is secure, but if you make it so that you bring those practices in place that are, with broken processes or human error or those types of things, the cloud is just someone else's data center that you are operating on. So I think it's really important to kind of outline and identify that. It's not going to automatically give you all of the best practices that you're supposed to have in conjunction with kind of setting up your environment. So if you see here, this type of setup allows you, and I'm going to zoom right in, to quickly see that there's anomalous behavior, there's anomalous logins, you're seeing the attack chain, there's a mass download, so on and so forth. And you're able to kind of quickly trace where the issue lies across the environment. So for anyone that's looking to ensure that they're able to properly secure their environment and also have some sort of capability to be able to recover or be able to, respond and investigate issues, this is a really good way to be able to do that. From a remediation and a response standpoint, you also have the SOAR capabilities, and you have like the logic apps / the runbook setup that gives you the ability to be able to quickly create an incident in ServiceNow, if you're using that as your service management platform, and have it pretty much trigger all of the alerts to you and start to send you information. And if you also want it to take action, it basically gives you the ability or the action that you can choose to block the user in Azure AD or block the user in from your firewall level, so on and so forth. So this is really like, for folks that are considering this, this is definitely something that'll help you throughout the holistic process and the life cycle for you to be able to visualize and identify, protect, detect across incidents that do come across the board. With that said, now that we've gotten past the first 3 areas of NIST, or maybe I want to say first 4 areas of NIST, I'll jump right back in. This is an area from when you look at recovery, everyone does a really good job with identify, protect, and detect, or they at least do somewhat of a decent job with identify, protect, detect. They have different tools or they have different solutions, some Microsoft, some non-Microsoft. Whatever the case may be, they're able to quickly see what's going on within the environment. However, when it comes to response and recovery, these are the 2 areas of NIST that we see that don't happen very quickly. So a lot of times there's a backup solution in place, and these types of things that are there, the backups are replicated, but it takes a very, very, very long time for you to actually recover the environment. So here's a sample process. I had the customer scenario in here, but I kind of adjusted it to more of a sample process for you to kind of see. This scenario was, they had disk-to-disk backup, or they had a solution, and I won't name the solution that they had, but they had a solution that was doing the backup for their environment. They had a replica that was going off to a secondary site, along with tapes that were going off with Iron Mountain or with a provider that was going off site. The challenge with their solution was that they didn't have adequate or properly tested infrastructure that was in place for them to be able to do that rapid recovery or that rapid response scenario. And I'll show you some more examples on how we can do that, but they didn't have that scenario in place. And so what they had, when we looked at their cost, one of the biggest challenges was, well, we don't have the money or the ability to set up all this cloud infrastructure. We've already paid for this hardware. We've already paid for this backup solution. We already have this in place. How do we use our existing products and processes in order for us to be effective and for this to work? So when we looked at their analysis of what their RPO and their RTO look like, their RPO was 24 hours from a recovery and response perspective if something were to happen within their environment. So they had their backup solution license. They had, and keep in mind, these prices are very, very low if you're in the private sector. This was a government public institution, so their prices were like 95% discounted. So I know when you're looking at this, you're like, how is it even possible to have this type of solution at, like around 100K? But just to give you an example and comparing apples to apples, the backup solution was in place, the licenses and things like that were in place, the hardware was in place, the disk was there, so on and so forth. But when they started looking at it, they said, look, from my RPO and my RTO perspective, it's still going to take me 24 hours because I need to do a daily backup and then ship that off to a secondary site or ship that off to an offsite solution. One of the key things that they found was they didn't have enough hardware at the secondary site, nor if they had the hardware at the secondary site, was it tested and actually adequate for them to be able to fail over and run out of that environment for the next 3 to 5 months. When this situation unfolded with this institution, the environment had to be failed over for close to 5 or 6 months, and they had to run out of that. And in this previous scenario, they just didn't have that capability or capacity to do so. If you look at a complementary scenario to what's already kind of in place, if you already have a backup solution or a recovery and response solution in place, consider looking at a cloud provider like Microsoft Azure that gives you the ability to be able to rent hardware or stand it up in the event that you need. And so when we started doing the evaluation of their RPO and their RTO, we noticed, we're like, wow, you went from 24 hours and 3 weeks of being able to pretty much set up the bare bones infrastructure, restore from tape, rebuild the OSs, and go on your kind of process with that, to about 5 minutes and 15 minutes for being able to kind of do that recovery and that response exercise for about the same cost as what they were paying to ship a lot of their stuff offsite and so on. So what I'll do is I'll quickly whiteboard what that scenario would look like. And it may differ from user to user, it may differ from environment to environment, but here's a sample scenario of what that would be. And I know I'm using Paint just to kind of give you an idea, but please feel free to ask questions as soon as I'm done doing this whiteboard session. So if this is your data center and you have about, let's just say for numbers sake, you have about 100 VMs, right? Or this could be 100, this could be 1,000, whatever the case may be. In this environment, you have the ability to quickly set up a rapid recovery and response solution stack, leveraging the power of Microsoft Azure. And what you're able to do is you're able to pretty much take all of, let's say you're using VMware in your environment, and I'll just say data center using VMware or Hyper-V. And based on your environment and setup, and this can also be physical hardware too. So if you have physical systems as well, not just virtual systems, but you have some physical systems that need to be replicated, so on and so forth, you now have the ability to set up replication appliances and be able to just replicate the storage. So you can only set up, you don't have to pretty much have the VMs running live. So what you're doing is you're taking that VMDK, and I'll kind of just draw this out, and I'm doing this on the fly, but you can take this VMDK that's sitting here and pretty much be able to bring it over or do a full on copy of it into the Azure environment. And what that does is that gives you that hardware that's available on demand as you need, and pretty much allows you to only pay for the storage cost and not pay for the infrastructure cost until you activate the DR environment or until you do some testing or those types of scenarios. What that gives you is the ability to save money. So the same offsite storage piece that you saw here, or the same offsite cost that you saw of just sending something in your environment offsite, you're now able to basically do the same exact thing, but have an RPO and an RTO of about 15 minutes with copies, pretty much like with snapshots and copies of the environment if you need to roll back the infrastructure in the event of a ransomware attack. So I hope this was kind of informative as far as showing you the process and how quickly you can do it. A quick way to see this is I have a virtual machine that's setting up here. And pretty much if I have my vCenter system on premise, I have my appliance system, I'm able to do a failover or a test failover to be able to fail over the environment. Now, somebody would ask the question, well, what if I get stuck in a scenario where whatever I fail over is also encrypted? And that's where you have the recovery point that you can pretty much change as a part of the process. and quickly mount a different recovery point on here for you to be able to bring the environment up. So with that said, I know I've kind of walked through a lot along with the scenario. I know I have 15 minutes, so I'm a little bit over, but essentially our goal is really to have security as a thought that's not necessarily an afterthought, but something that we do prior to a cloud migration or a scenario. With that said, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And Danny, if you have any questions in the audience, I'm happy to take them.
Hey, Nair, that was great. I don't see anything right now, but I appreciate your presentation. It was awesome.
Okay, awesome. Is there anything else that we need?
Nope, all set. Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one.